She slid the folder across the table before I could even sit down. "We've already spoken to an attorney," my daughter said, not looking at me. "The house was in Mom's name. You need to understand what that means." I looked at her, then at the man beside her, her husband, who was already checking his phone like the conversation was a formality. My son-in-law. I had walked this man down the aisle 12 years ago, stood beside him at the rehearsal dinner, and shook his hand and meant it. Now he sat in my kitchen with the posture of a landlord. "Sit down," I said quietly. Neither of them moved. Neither of them sat. My wife had been gone for 11 days. I had driven myself to the funeral home alone because my daughter said she would meet me there, and then arrived 40 minutes late with her husband and 2 people I didn't recognize, both of whom turned out to be from the property management company he owned. They stood near the back of the room like they were assessing square footage. I didn't say anything. I was still in the part of grief where you go through motions because stopping means drowning. But this was something else. "Dad," my daughter said, finally looking at me. "We're not trying to be cruel. We just need clarity on the asset situation before things get complicated." Asset situation. Those were the words she used. My wife of 38 years was 11 days in the ground, and my daughter was standing in the kitchen we built together, talking about asset situations. I reached across the table and closed the folder without opening it. "Where's your brother?" I asked. She exchanged a glance with her husband. "He doesn't need to be here for this. I'd like him here." "Dad, I'd like my son here," I said again. Same tone, same volume. She pulled out her phone and stepped toward the back door. Her husband stayed seated, still not looking up from his screen. I went to the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't want. My hands were steady. I noticed that, after everything, my hands were still steady. My son arrived 20 minutes later. He came through the front door without knocking, which was how he'd always come home, even as a grown man. He looked at his sister, then at his brother-in-law, then at me. "What's going on?" he asked. Nobody answered him right away, so he sat down at the table, across from his sister's husband, and folded his hands. He was wearing a work jacket, the kind with the company name embroidered on the chest. He'd taken time off from the shop for the funeral and hadn't gone back yet. I could tell he hadn't slept much. Neither had I. "Your sister has some concerns about the house," I said. My son looked at her. "What kind of concerns?" "It's a legal matter," she said. "The property was deeded in Mom's name after the refinance in 2009, which means it doesn't automatically transfer. He's her husband," my son said. "Legally, it's more complicated than that." My son leaned back. He had his mother's eyes, that particular shade of quiet that could mean anything. "What are you actually asking for?" Her husband set down his phone for the first time. "We're not asking for anything. We're just making sure everyone understands the situation before decisions get made that can't be unmade." I looked at him. I looked at him for a long time. He met my eyes and didn't look away, which I'll give him. He was never a coward. He was something else entirely. "I understand the situation," I said. "I think we're done for today." My daughter started to say something. Her husband touched her arm. They left 10 minutes later. My son stayed. He sat at the kitchen table while I rinsed the mugs, and neither of us spoke for a while. Outside, the maple tree his mother had planted along the fence line was just starting to leaf out. She had planted it the spring after my son was born. She said she wanted something that would outlast the both of us. "Did you know about this?" my son asked. "That she was looking into the deed?" "No." "That she and her husband had been talking to attorneys?" "I had suspicions." "How long?" I dried my hands on the dish towel. "Your mother got sick in October. By December, he was asking me about refinancing options. Said it was a good time to pull equity. I told him I wasn't interested." I paused. He didn't bring it up again, but I noticed things after that. The way she stopped including me in certain conversations. The way he started answering for her when we were all together. My son stared at the table. "She's scared of him. I know. She's not a bad person. I know that too." He looked up at me. "So what do you do?" I went to the hallway closet. On the top shelf, behind the winter coats and the box of Christmas ornaments we'd never been able to throw away, was a fireproof document case. Gray, dented at one corner from when we'd moved houses back in 1998. I carried it to the kitchen table, set it down, and opened the combination lock. "Before your mother's diagnosis," I said. She and I updated our estate plan. Both of us. Together. We used an attorney in town, a woman named Patricia, whom your mother trusted completely. We signed everything. A revocable living trust, with both our names. The house, the accounts, the investment property in her sister's name that came to us after her sister passed. I pulled out a blue folder, thick with tabbed documents. The deed was transferred into the trust in March of last year. Whatever was in her name alone stopped being just hers the moment we executed this. My son was very still. "They don't know about it," I said. He exhaled slowly. "Dad, I didn't hide it to be deceptive. I just stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening." He looked at the folder, then at me. "What happens next?" "I have an appointment with Patricia tomorrow morning. After that, we'll see." He nodded once. He had his mother's way of doing that too. That single nod that meant "I hear you and I trust you" without needing to say it out loud. "Your mother met me at a hardware store on a Thursday afternoon in 1983. I was 26, working for my uncle's construction company, and I had gone in to price out lumber for a porch addition. She was there buying paint for her apartment. She had a color swatch in her hand and was holding it up to the fluorescent light like she could see something in it the rest of us couldn't. I asked her what she was looking for. She said she didn't know exactly, but she'd recognize it when she found it. We were married 11 months later. She was a school librarian for 31 years. She knew every child in town by name and remembered which ones liked mysteries and which ones needed something with pictures and which ones just needed somewhere quiet to sit for a while. When she retired, the gymnasium was full. Kids she'd helped 15 years ago came back as adults. One young man brought his own children and pointed at her and said, "That's the woman who changed my life." She cried in the car on the way home and made me promise not to tell anyone. I built us a life I was proud of. Not a flashy one. We weren't wealthy by any measure anyone would put in a magazine. But we owned our home and we raised 2 children and we traveled when we could and we sat on the back porch every Sunday morning with coffee and the paper and argued about things that didn't matter and agreed about things that did. For 38 years, we were a unit, not a perfect one, but a real one. When she got sick, I drove her to every appointment. I learned the names of her medications and the side effects and the schedules. I set alarms on my phone. I cooked because she had stopped wanting to, and I sat beside her in the evenings and read aloud from whatever she was in the middle of because her eyes tired easily by the end. My daughter visited on weekends when her husband was traveling. When he was home, her visits were shorter. I noticed that too. My son came every Wednesday without fail. Sometimes he just sat with her and didn't say much. She said once that she appreciated that he didn't try to fix anything. "He just stays," she told me. That's enough. She died on a Tuesday in February. Quietly. The way she had lived. I was holding her hand. Patricia's office was on the 2nd floor of a building that used to be a shoe store. She'd been practicing estate law in this town for 24 years, and she had the particular manner of someone who had seen enough family conflict to be unsurprised by anything. She read through the documents I laid out. She asked 2 questions. Then she sat back. "The trust is valid," she said. "It predates the diagnosis. The deed transfer is properly recorded, and both signatures are witnessed and notarized. There's nothing here to contest in good faith. He'll try anyway. He might file something. It would go nowhere." She tapped the folder. "This is airtight. You're the sole trustee now that your wife has passed. The assets are yours to manage and distribute as you see fit." "I want protections in place," I said. "I don't want my son-in-law accessing anything through proxy or pressure or by convincing my daughter to sign something she doesn't fully understand. We can add restriction clauses and update all the account documentation. It'll take about 2 weeks. I want to start today." She nodded like that was exactly what she expected me to say. I also told her about the investment property. It had come to us through my wife's sister, who had no children and who had, in her own quiet way, trusted my wife completely. It was a small rental unit in a town 40 minutes east. Not valuable in any grand sense, but it generated steady income, and my wife had always said she wanted it handled carefully. I told Patricia I wanted to restructure the distribution of that income. I have someone in mind, I said. A beneficiary? A neighbor. He's 23. He's been cutting my grass and checking my mail since my wife got too sick for me to leave the house for long stretches. He never asked for anything. He just showed up. I paused. His mother is raising him and his younger sister alone. She works nights. Patricia wrote down the name I gave her. You want to establish a trust in his name? I want to make sure the income from that property goes somewhere that does some good. His mother is putting herself through nursing school. I'd rather the money go there than anywhere that already has enough. Patricia looked at me over her reading glasses. She smiled slightly. You've thought about this for a while. I've had a lot of quiet evenings. She nodded. I'll draw it up. I left her office with a folder of signed papers and the particular stillness that comes after you've finally acted on something you've been carrying for too long. It was a cold morning. I walked to the end of the block and stood outside the old diner, where my wife and I used to eat breakfast on Saturday mornings when the kids were young. It was a different name now, different owners, but the same windows, the same black and white tile I could see through the glass. I stood there for a minute, not going in, just acknowledging it. Then I drove home. The answering machine had 2 messages. The first was from my daughter. Her voice was careful, measured, the tone she used when she was trying to sound reasonable. She said she hoped we could find time to talk soon, that she wanted to clear the air, that things had gotten off on the wrong foot. She said her husband was just trying to help. She said the word transparency twice. The second was from my son. He said he was coming by Thursday, if that was all right. He said he'd bring dinner. I deleted the first message. I called my son back and told him Thursday was fine and that I'd handle the drinks. 3 days later, the envelope arrived. Thick paper, downtown firm, return address in gold foil. I recognized the style. I'd seen it before, years ago, when a contractor had tried to shake down my uncle's company over a dispute that had no merit. Men with money hire that kind of firm when they want to frighten rather than resolve. The letter was polite. It used words like uncertainty regarding estate structure and potential irregularities in the trust documentation and our client's interest in an amicable resolution. It did not use my son-in-law's name. It didn't need to. It ended by saying they reserved the right to pursue all available legal remedies if discussions did not proceed in good faith. I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice. Then I called Patricia. I've already seen it, she said. They sent a copy to my office as a courtesy. The word courtesy carried a dry weight when she said it. My response is being drafted. They're posturing. Will it hold things up? Temporarily. Possibly. They may file a challenge. If they do, it will be reviewed and dismissed. The trust is properly executed and predates any claim they could make. A pause. Are you all right? I'm fine, I said. And I meant it, which surprised me a little. That night I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, from memory. I lay in bed and thought about the house, about the 32 years we had lived in it, about the way my wife used to leave her reading glasses on the kitchen windowsill and never remember where she'd put them, about the dent in the hallway baseboard where my son had crashed his bicycle indoors on a dare when he was 11, about the garden she'd kept along the back fence that I hadn't touched since October because I didn't know how, and because leaving it felt like keeping something of hers alive. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the girl she had been, curious and stubborn and fiercely loyal, who used to follow me around the workshop on Saturday mornings asking questions about every tool. She was 8 years old when I taught her how to use a level. She'd been so proud of getting that bubble centered. She showed everyone who came to the house for a month. I didn't know exactly when things had shifted. I knew it had happened gradually, the way most losses do. A degree of distance here, a changed priority there, a man in her life who required more than he gave, and who had, over years, quietly reorganized what she valued. I didn't hate her for it. I understood it better than she probably knew. But understanding something doesn't mean accepting the consequences of it. I wrote her a letter, not through the lawyer, not for court. For her. 1 page. I chose my words, the way I used to choose lumber. by grain and weight and what the job actually needed. I received your husband's attorney's letter. I want you to know I'm not angry. I want you to understand what I am instead. I am a man who built this house with his hands and raised you in it and buried your mother from it. I am a man who has watched you choose, again and again, to look away from things I know you've seen. I am not going to fight you. I am not going to negotiate with your husband. All matters are being handled through my attorney, and if a challenge is filed, it will not succeed. What I want you to think about is not the house. It is the choice you're making about who you are. You are still my daughter. I will always love you, but I will no longer smooth over what you and your husband have done, out of a habit of keeping peace. Dad, I printed it, sealed it, drove to the post office myself. On the way back, I passed the elementary school where my wife had worked for the last 18 years of her career. The flag was at half staff for something I didn't know about. I sat at the stop sign longer than I needed to. Then I drove home. My son came Thursday as promised. He brought takeout from the barbecue place we'd all gone to after his high school graduation, which I hadn't thought about in years, but which turned out to be exactly right. We ate at the kitchen table, which we hadn't done together in longer than I could remember. He asked about Patricia. I told him everything was in motion. He asked if my daughter had called. She left a message, I said. I haven't called back. He was quiet for a moment, pulling apart a piece of bread. She's scared of losing him, he said finally. That's what all of this is about. I know. She's made choices I wouldn't make. He paused. But she's not him. No, I agreed. She's not. He looked out the window at the backyard. Mom's garden is still out there. I know. I don't know what to do with it. I could help, if you want. He looked at me. I don't know much about it either, but there are books. I thought about my wife standing out there in her work gloves with her catalog of plants and her careful system of labels. I thought about what she'd say if I told her our son wanted to learn. She would have smiled that particular smile, the one she reserved for moments when something came together that she'd quietly hoped for. Saturday morning, I said, "Come for coffee first." He nodded. Same nod as always. The motion Randall filed, because by then his name was on the papers and there was no more pretending otherwise, was heard 6 weeks later in a small courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and floor wax. Patricia was beside me. She had brought everything. The executed trust documents, the deed records, a letter from my wife's physician confirming her cognitive clarity at the time of signing, and the written records from the county recorder's office showing the exact date of the transfer. My son-in-law sat at the other table with his attorney, a man in a chalk-striped suit who had the careful cheerfulness of someone being paid to be optimistic. The judge was older, patient-faced, with the manner of someone who had presided over a great many things and had stopped being impressed by any of them. He read the submitted materials without expression. Then he asked the opposing attorney 2 questions. The answers were not satisfying. He looked at Patricia. She said 6 sentences. He looked back at the documents. "The trust is properly executed," the judge said. "The deed transfer is on record. The claimant has provided no evidence of irregularity in either the signing or the notarization." Motion denied. He struck the gavel. Quietly, like a period at the end of a sentence that had already been obvious for a while. Patricia leaned toward me and said, "That's it." I nodded. I had already known it would go this way. But there is something about hearing a judge say it, in a room with official seals on the wall, that makes a thing finally, completely, real. My son-in-law left without looking at me. His attorney followed, already on his phone. I sat for a moment longer, not from drama, just because I needed a breath. Outside, the sun was high and sharp, and the trees along the courthouse square were full with early spring. Patricia shook my hand, said she'd send the final account transfer confirmations by the end of the week, and walked to her car. I walked the other direction, along the square, past the hardware store where I'd met my wife 41 years ago. Different name now, different owners, but the same building, same corner, same angle of afternoon light across the windows. I kept walking. I passed the library where my wife had spent 31 years of her life. There was a reading garden out front. installed the year before she retired. A small bronze plaque on the fence post. Established in honor of our community's readers, she had helped design it. She'd fussed over the placement of the benches for 6 months. I stopped and looked at it for a while. When I got home, there was a car parked at the curb I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw him, my neighbor's son, the young man I'd put in the trust documentation, sitting on my front steps in his work clothes, a paper grocery bag beside him. "Mrs. Chen from next door told me you had a court thing today," he said, standing up. I didn't want to assume it went okay, but I also didn't want to not check. He held up the bag slightly. "I made soup. My mom showed me how. I brought enough for 2 days." I looked at him. He was 23 years old, wearing work boots that had seen better days, and he had the direct, slightly uncertain gaze of someone trying to do the right thing without being sure of the protocol. "Come in," I said. He followed me to the kitchen. I put the kettle on. He set the containers of soup on the counter with the careful organization of someone who had watched his mother do the same thing and paid attention. "How's your mother?" I asked. "Good. Tired. She passed her midterm last week." He leaned against the counter. "She doesn't know I'm here, by the way. She'd say I was overstepping. She'd be wrong." He smiled a little. "That's what I figured." We ate soup at the kitchen table, the two of us, while the afternoon light moved across the floor. He told me about a job he'd bid on, a landscaping contract for one of the commercial parks along the interstate. He wasn't sure he had enough equipment yet, but the numbers could work if he rented for the first season. "Start the way you can sustain," I said. "Don't borrow against what you haven't earned yet." He thought about that. "Is that how you did it?" "I did it the wrong way first. Then I learned." He nodded. "Filed it somewhere." I could tell he was a filer. Before he left, he picked up his empty containers and rinsed them at the sink without being asked. He paused at the back door, looking out at the garden. "Do you know what any of it is?" he asked. "Not really. My son and I are going to try to figure it out Saturday." He looked at it a moment longer. "I could come, if you want another set of hands. I don't know much about plants, but I'm good at following instructions." I thought about my wife's labeled garden stakes, still standing in the beds, her careful handwriting and permanent marker. I thought about 3 of us out there on a Saturday morning, none of us fully knowing what we were doing, trying anyway. "Saturday," I said. 8 o'clock. Come for coffee first." He said he would, and I believed him. There is a kind of quiet that arrives after long effort. Not the quiet of defeat, not the quiet of solitude. The kind where everything has been said that needed saying, and everything has been filed that needed filing, and the people who matter are still there, and the ones who chose to leave had their reasons, which you've stopped trying to explain. "My daughter called 2 weeks after the court date," I answered. Her voice was different than the last message she'd left, without the careful measurement of it, less rehearsed. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not all at once, and not completely. But I know I handled things wrong. I know I let things happen I shouldn't have." I sat down. "He's not a bad person," she said, then stopped herself. "I was going to say something I'm not sure I believe anymore." "You don't have to explain him to me," I said. "Dad, I love you," I said. "That part hasn't changed, but I'm not going to tell you it was fine. It wasn't fine." A long pause. I could hear her breathing. "I know," she said finally. "I'd like to have dinner with you, without him for now. Just you and your brother and me." I paused. "Your mother's birthday is in May. I'd like us to mark it together." That's what she would have wanted. My daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, just that. Okay." It was not a resolution. It was a beginning, which is a different and more honest thing. After we hung up, I went outside. The evening was cool, the kind of late March evening that can't decide yet. My son and the young man from next door had done good work on Saturday. The beds were cleared. The stakes, with my wife's handwriting, were still there, each plant labeled in her careful script. We hadn't moved a single one. I walked the length of the fence line slowly, reading each tag. Coneflower, black-eyed Susan, lavender, which she'd had to replant 3 times before it finally took, Russian sage, which she'd been unreasonably proud of, as if she'd convinced it personally to survive. I stood there in the cooling air and read her handwriting, label by label. Then I went inside, put the kettle on, and sat at the kitchen table with the folder of documents that had already been filed and settled and signed. I didn't open it. I just rested my hand on top of it for a moment. The way you rest your hand on something that did what it was supposed to do. I thought about what I wanted to leave behind. Not just the property, not the accounts, though those mattered. I thought about the kind of evidence a life leaves when it's lived with intention. The garden with its careful labels. The neighbor boy who showed up with soup. The son who learned to let silence be enough. The folder that held its ground when it needed to. There's a version of this story where I spent these months angry. Where I made every decision from that place, sharp and reactive, using the documents as weapons rather than tools. I understand why someone might. There are days when what happened feels like it deserves a sharper response than the one I gave. But my wife was not a woman who believed that the loudest voice wins. She believed in the quiet, sustained thing. She believed in showing up. She believed in staying. I made myself into a man who tries to deserve the woman she was, not always successfully, but with effort. And these days, effort is what I have left to give. So if you are somewhere in a season that feels like this one, where people you trusted have shown you who they actually are, where the ground under something you built has shifted, let me say what I needed someone to say to me. You are not obligated to shrink to make the people who failed you more comfortable. You are not obligated to forgive before you're ready or to explain yourself to those who've already decided. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to use the documents in the folder you've been carrying. You are allowed to redirect your life toward the people who show up. Even quietly. Even with soup. Even with a willingness to learn which plant is which in a garden they didn't plant. That is not bitterness. That is not revenge. That is just finally, at this age, knowing your own worth. If this story meant something to you, if some part of it sat beside something you've been carrying, leave a comment. I'd like to hear you. You've been quiet long enough.